Welcome to 5 Good Minutes. You're listening to today's inspirational message on the book of Philemon with Kurt Bjorklund.
Today on 5 Good Minutes, we're going to begin a new, just a quick study of the New Testament book of Philemon. It's a single chapter, so it'll be a single week, 5 days. And this is a story that doesn't take a lot to comprehend in the sense that Paul writes this letter to Philemon, who had somebody who had been his slave, Onesimus, who had evidently wronged Philemon in some way. And Paul and Onesimus shared some time in prison, and in that time, Onesimus becomes a Christ follower. And in verse 11, Paul's appeal is, he was once useless to you, now indeed he is useful. And this is a play on words in the original language, according to the ESV Study Bible. In the Greek, it was Archistos and Euchristos. And here's how they describe it. They say, this play on word describes the before and after of Onesimus' conversion. By stealing from Philemon and running away, Onesimus had become useless. But having repented and become obedient to Christ, Onesimus now became useful both to Paul and Philemon. This change particularly highlights the transformation of the gospel. And so you have this story about Paul writing and saying, I want you to welcome or receive Onesimus back into your life. And the other thing that's just very quickly interesting to me, just looking at this, is the yous in this book, or the yours, are plural in verses 1 through 4, and then again in verses 23 through 25. But they're singular in verses 5 through 21. And so there's this sense in which he's writing this and saying, this is to all people to understand a little bit about what it is to receive people who've done us wrong, and yet it's individually applied. And there's always a tension between being gracious and insisting on somebody understanding what they've done. And what probably happens for many people is there's an overly zealous desire to see people have to take accountability rather than being gracious. And certainly there's a time for accountability and standards and restriction. Paul, who is the author of Philemon, is also the one who wrote in 1 Corinthians about putting people who out of the church who were engaged in a type of sexual immorality that he says wasn't even named among the pagans, meaning there was some kind of immorality taking place, and here it had to do with taking your father's wife and some different things like that, and that weren't even accepted among the pagan culture. And so, like in our day and age, it would be fair to say that when somebody has done something that is sexually dubious around children, to say that person, even if they've repented, can't have access to kids. If somebody who's in a leadership position and they abandon it, or they start down a process of reconciliation and they don't finish it, I think you could say, okay, you're not called on in this text to welcome such a person. In other words, there was a church out west years ago where a well-known pastor who did really well in terms of building a large following. The church just imploded, and the man never submitted to any kind of process of discipline and simply reemerged in another town. I don't think that you're called to welcome that person. There's a pastor in the South who had an affair and started beautifully into a process of reconciliation under the governance of a church. And then when he didn't like the process, it didn't go fast enough, decided that he'd just strike out on his own aside from the process. I'm not sure that you're called on to welcome those people in that instance. Like that's not what this is about. But what this is about is saying that there is a need to welcome people graciously, that is individual and corporate. And we see this verse 17, it says, so if you consider me your partner, this is Paul to Philemon, receive him, speaking about Onesimus, as you would receive me. And the word for receive in Greek is paralambano, and it means to take into your social circle or home. And so what Paul is urging here is for Philemon to take somebody into his social circle, into his home, into his life, who has wronged him. Now, Onesimus was repentant, he had had a conversion to faith, but there still could have been an urge in Philemon to say, look, he's done wrong. I don't need to take this person back. And the default position of Christians is where we are called to receive people and live and demonstrate the gospel. Who in your life would be somebody who's wronged you and you've wanted to keep at arm's length? What would it look like for you today to receive that person back into your life? Again, I'm not talking about an abuser or a person who's a danger to children. I'm not talking about that. But who has wronged you in some way that you could receive as a demonstration of the message of Jesus Christ?
Thanks for joining us here today. There's a lot of great content to explore on Orchard Hill Plus and on the Orchard Hill main feed from the weekend. Have a great day.